Welcome into Newhouse Afternoon. Max Gifford, Dylan Byer, Nico Horning back with you here. And it's election day.
It is.
It is?
That's the biggest. Come on. You're going to be that person? You're living under a rock a little bit here in 2024, Max?
Sure. No. I promise everyone in the world I voted today, just as everyone should vote.
Yes.
I agree.
Is that the extent of our election talk today?
Yes, it is.
We can spend a whole 10 minutes with it if we want to.
We're getting political. We're doing a tight 5 minutes on which side will win. All right, Nico, you be.
Man.
Nico's actually in the red polo today, so he might be making a statement. I just want to point it out. Dylan's wearing the blue jeans.
Yep.
Blue
and you're wearing
jeans.
red and blue.
Yeah, exactly. You see, I'm the moderate one here. Only one that's moderate on the show, neutral.
True. Well, big day. Go out and vote if you haven't already, no matter who you're voting for. I would go vote. I think that's the most important thing for our country right now. But starting the show off a little bit, before we even get into sports, another conversation. The weather outside, Max. We'd love to talk about the weather on the show to start off.
All right, so
it's 75 degrees here in November.
All right, so for those betting at home, we talked about the election. That cashes out,
Yep.
and the weather, always a cash out. I mean, that's got to be like minus 10,000 odds at this point, every single show that we're on.
I'm sick of this weather. I want it to be Syracuse, cold, windy,
I will
snowing.
say, Halloween to November 1st was like a complete change.
Yeah.
It was
for
a
sure.
complete change in terms of weather.
Yes. I thought for a minute you were going to say, like, Aaron Rodgers should be benched for a second.
Well, he
but
should, but we'll
Hey,
get to that
the
later.
Jets won this week.
I can't.
Team.
All right. Well, to start off with, Syracuse basketball's back. The men's squad played last night. Not what we had hoped for Syracuse, and then the women's team starts tonight. Initial thoughts from the men's game, because there's a lot to break down. It was a ugly game. Syracuse had to play from behind. It was a rough look for the Orange.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of people today on this show maybe expected the headlines around Syracuse to be just focused on, elephants, donkeys, talking about the election a little more. I don't think anyone had in their bingo card us to be talking about the Dolphins as much as they were, because Lemoyne came to play against Syracuse. I think I'll just start there. They came to play very similar to how the men's soccer team did just a couple months ago when they actually beat Syracuse, a team that won the national championship a couple of years ago. I know Lemoyne's only in their second year Division I, but boy, are they not overlooking some of the opponents they have to play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always the one to jump on somebody's back and be
Really?
worried.
No.
Never me to do that. I am not worried by what I saw. I know a lot of people, they finished the game and they woke up this morning and they're like, oh, who is this Syracuse team going to be? I understand Lemoyne was leading for most of the game and it took really the last 2 minutes for Syracuse to get in the lead. But I really wasn't expecting anything else. I mean, this is the first year without Judah Mintz. The two notable guys that we know are Chris Bell and JJ Starling. Everyone else is kind of up in the air, question mark. This was a game for them to get their chemistry together. We talked about it last season, even freshman year. Chemistry is something that has been lacking from this program for a very long time, and that's the nature of the team now with NIL. So many guys are coming and going. But I'm really not that worried.
But what are the two exhibitions for then, if you're talking about chemistry?
By the way, those exhibition
can't-
games.
And what's the offseason for?
You can't build chemistry
I agree
in
with
two,
Dylan.
two exhibition games. You also have Donnie Freeman, who's a true freshman playing in his first college games. He's great. He's going to continue to get great all season.
He
first
wasn't
game-
anything fantastic, though.
But I wouldn't expect him to be first game, true freshman.
The exhibition.
Number 6 recruit in the country, I think you can expect a little more. Against Lemoyne. I'm just going to say it.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
But
But I'm not worried about
maybe
him.
I'm taking,
There's some other players I'm worried about.
Maybe I'm taking the Dylan role today, but I am scared.
Yeah.
I'm scared about this team.
I am too.
Right now, they are going to lose to Colgate next week. This team is going to lose to Colgate next week. If they show even a resemblance of how they played today, of how they played yesterday, they are losing to Colgate, and I have zero doubts in my mind about that.
That's fair. So, Dylan, you brought up the chemistry a little bit, and I think a lot of teams are dealing with that based on the transfer portal stuff and everything. But it's a very valid point, because this team, it's going to take a certain amount of time for them to find their chemistry. You'd hope it's early on in the non-conference play. Obviously, it wasn't last night. But what stood out to you guys, whether it was an offensive problem, a defensive problem, everything. I mean, this team had 4 or 5 turnovers in the first few minutes of the game.
Yeah, the turnovers are something you could look to. I also think three-point shooting, another very, very bad thing that needs to be worked on.
But going off of that, is this going to be another year where they got to make the threes to win?
Yes.
Are we looking at that, or is that too early to call?
I've said that since since freshman year. They went 4 for 22 last night on three-point shooting. The game of basketball has changed as we know it. Big men aren't needed anymore. It's all about the three-point shooting, and that's where Chris Bell comes into play. Now, what I liked from Chris Bell's game last night is that it wasn't just all three-point shooting, which he relied so heavily on last year. He was going into the paint, drawing fouls in the paint, which is how he's evolving as a player. But ever since Joe Girard left, we're missing that bang three-point shooter. So I'd like to see who really develops in that role, because it's one that's needed in college basketball.
Now, you can argue Chris Bell, his stats on paper show that he's been sort of that replacement for, I guess, that Joe Girard archetype, if you will. The issue is he's just not consistent enough.
No.
And you just have to hope and pray that it's not the same song and dance again with Chris Bell.
That's the problem. And he was the second best three-point shooter last year in the ACC when it came to percentage. And he can build on that. I mean, he's one of the best shooters. He's just got to be more consistent, because there were a lot of games last year where he would, chuck him up and Syracuse would lose. But when he made them, Syracuse played well. So the goal this year is obviously to not have that happen again. I think there is a lot more versatility on this team this year. You can look at Jair Davis. He had a great game, double-double.
Him and Chris Bell, I think, two guys you can look to that if they don't, Red Autry said in his press conference, they don't have Jair, they don't win that game.
Right.
But also Chris Bell was big with that takeaway at the end to force that offensive foul.
I honestly think if Chris Bell does not make that takeaway, Lemoyne makes a shot and wins the game. From how they were shooting all game, Lemoyne could not miss a shot.
So that's the other thing. They shot very well.
Yes.
I think you got to give credit to them, because no matter who you're playing,
It always
if the team makes baskets.
But it always seems like the team's going. It always seems like the team makes baskets against Syracuse.
It always seems that game, but
true.
I think this game, the reason why I'm not looking at it so negatively is because I think it was more of an on game for Lemoyne than an off game for Syracuse. There wasn't so many negativities I can point out about how Syracuse played, rather than crediting what Lemoyne was able to do.
Would you have the same answer if Syracuse lost that game? See, that's a different story.
It's a great question. That's a great question.
It is, but when I look at the roster and I look at who put the points up, and I look the depth was a problem last year. No one came off the bench scoring. Davis with 22 points off the bench. The one thing that I could say, which has been a consistent theme, is how Syracuse starts games. Syracuse has never started a game with a 10-plus point lead. That's so crucial, especially in ACC basketball. Once you get into those games, you got to come out strong and you got to take the lead.
Yeah, the only games I can really think of last year where Syracuse actually came out and dominated the start was against North Carolina, the game they won at home.
Yeah.
You were just waiting for something bad to happen. And then the game against NC State, where they ended up pulling out the win at the end, but NC State made that little comeback in the second half on the road.
Did they start hot against Clemson at home last year? I believe they.
I think Joe Girard just shut them.
He did, but I don't know if it was right away.
I remember Clemson absolutely dominating Syracuse when they were at home against for the final game of the season.
Yeah. Anyways, slow start. The turnovers were apparent, but also Chris Bell had a three-point foul call. He shot one of the Lemoyne players on the three-point line. There's a second guy who did it. I don't know who.
There were two of those really early.
Yeah, those can't happen, because that's 6 free points right there, which leads me to the free throws. Syracuse shot like 55% from the free throw line.
Good.
That's inexcusable.
That's
inexcusable.
I mean, my great-grandfather, I've said this a couple times, he always says, you live by the three or you die by the three. I think, watching the game last night would have been like his worst nightmare.
Oh,
the fact,
sure.
Missed free throws and only three-point shooting.
Yeah.
And for Syracuse, a lot of missed three-pointers because they couldn't make any of them. Dylan mentioned it, only making 4. Right. So you talk about not being able to make three-pointers, not having the ability to make free throws either. Chances are, 9 times out of 10, you're not winning a lot of those games.
Definitely not. J.J. Starling, also a slow start. Jaquan Carlos, not really apparent offensively. Had some assists. That's going to be how he's going to build into this team this year. But looking forward a little bit, right? Colgate next Tuesday. This team's got some time off, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. What's got to change going forward? What's got to mesh a little bit better, I think, down the line? Because if you look at this team overall, too, you don't have that go-to guy, I'd say, which is a good problem in a sense if you can get the team to culminate around each other, but they don't have that right now.
Well, I've been saying this since I watched that Clarion exhibition, and the fact that I believe that Jaquan Carlos is the most essential player to this team, because you need that true point guard. I don't really call Judiments a true point guard because he played so much of that, hero ball, and he tried to, take it all himself. Whereas with Jaquan, you have that facilitator. You have a guy that can drive. You have a guy that can shoot as well. And we saw none of that last night. So part of that is the key for, him to really take over that leadership, take over, that orchestrator role on the offense. But, I mean, part of it is you got to make shots, because right now I don't see any upside for the defense at this point.
Defense was off.
And I think it's going to continue to be off. I mean, this offense, if it is good, I think it can be really good, and it can be one of the top offenses literally in the ACC. But when it comes to defense,
especially points in the paint, they allowed so many last night in the first half.
I honestly, and that is where size comes into play.
Yes.
Especially with Naheem McLeod was out all of last season with an injury. He's a guy off the bench who has to come in defensively and stop those layups and get those rebounds, because rebounding was also a huge issue last season. So that's definitely something that needs to be working.
Yeah, Eddie Lampkin comes in. Peter Majstorovic comes into the equation. So I think the depth is there, the size is there. But how do they play together?
And you also don't have a ton of mobility, though, down there, which also is an issue.
Very true.
Granted, Lampkin has a great eye, and the fact that he can sort of work at the top of the key, he can work as a little bit of a facilitator as well, but he can't move. Naheem can't move. And
sounds like a lot of guys can't move on the basketball.
and Majstorovic is still very, very young, I think. I think he's still got plenty of room to improve. You saw some of those careless turnovers last night. I think he's got some upside. I think he's a guy you can look out for on this squad. But it goes back to my point. I mean, I think next weekend's Colgate, it's going to come down to, can Syracuse make their shots? Because Colgate's going to make their shots.
We've seen what's happened between those two teams the last few years. Colgate with back-to-back wins, and then Syracuse finally won last year.
Yeah, after Colgate blew a 28-point lead.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Colgate loves to shoot the threes. So that's definitely – and it was interesting to see last season, once Boeheim left, how is Autry going to facilitate this defense? Because we all know what Boeheim did with his 2-3 zone. Last night they started in man. I think – the players got really tired the more the game went on.
They were a step behind for a while.
Yeah, so it's how long can you really keep that up? I'm interested to see how Adrian Autry develops this defense going forward.
Well, you know what? If this team wants to be good, put Colgate in game 2, because that defense will be exposed if they're not on it.
Very, very quickly.
Line, right?
So if I had an imaginary panic button right here, would you press the panic button?
Right now?
I'll say right now. Well, I'll give you two scenarios.
Okay.
Right now, are either of you hitting the panic button?
Yes, I am.
I want to say half yes. If they lost that game last night, yes.
Because I think there's a world, and I think, I said it off the top, I came out pretty hot. I think this team could be 1-1 by a week from now.
So that's
which
the
is
other
scary.
The other scenario is if Syracuse loses to Colgate, should we all be hitting the panic button for the future of this team?
It's tough.
I'd still say yes.
I mean, I'm almost jumping the gun, because it comes down to, you've got harder non-conference games on the schedule.
So here's the deal.
Colgate's
to put this in perspective, Syracuse lost 3 non-conference games last year.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that includes Tennessee. That includes really tough
Tennessee,
teams,
Gonzaga,
right? Yep.
2 teams. You're going to have to play Texas.
Texas and Tennessee.
You're going to play Tennessee.
Before the new
You're going to
year.
play Maryland also.
So you can't waste those losses.
No, exactly.
It's that simple, but yet it's not simple based on what they showed us last night.
And how much last year did we see some of those losses, really plague the Orange come tournament season and having any sort of resume because, you didn't have a signature win in non-conference play. I mean, you were lucky to escape that Colgate game, a team who ended up making the tournament. But if they would have lost that game, that would have just ruined their resume even more.
Definitely. We'll see what happens going forward, but a big game next Tuesday against Colgate, and it should be another fun one, to be honest, because these two teams the last few years have been fun to watch and match up against each other. All right, enough basketball for now. When we come back, Syracuse football had a big matchup on Saturday, a good comeback win over Virginia Tech. We'll break that down a little bit and dive into what this team needs to do going forward. Newhouse Afternoon back here in just a second on ESPN Syracuse and Q Sports Talk.